All right. So we just have a quick introduction before I turn this over to Laura. Our topic today is transition, specifically the transition supporting people who are leaving the school system and switching over to adult services. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that is and the ages and different options there today. You'll get a pretty good overview for supporting people with transition. Sorry, I'm trying to admit people and talk at the same time. I'm not that good at multitasking right now. Okay, so we're gonna I want to do some quick introductions. Not everyone on this list here is able to make it today. A couple folks are traveling, but the broker community of practice, I think we started, our discussion started back in 2017. 2018, I think, was when we had our first broker community of practice meeting. And back in 2018 and 19, we would meet in person. And then, of course, with the pandemic, we've shifted over to virtual, which I think has worked out well. When we were in person, we really had to cap it to 40 or so people just due to the limitations with space. We've been able to be virtual. It's been great that we've, one, had people not have to drive 2 hours to get to the meeting, and two, we've been able to reach more brokers, which is really great. As far as the group that gets together to kind of help put these on and plan and get the PowerPoints going and reach out to presenters, it's shifted over the years as people have retired or had other obligations or expressed interest in helping us out, so they've joined. But right now it's mostly me as a parent of two kiddos who self-direct, agency broker at Heritage and FI at Heritage, and I do a very, very tiny independent broker caseload as well. We have Doreen, who's not able to make it today, I don't think, because of traveling, but she's a parent and an independent broker. Jenny, agency broker and FI at People Inc. Jen McCormick is an independent broker. Lynn Barnett is an independent broker and FI at Happiness House. And then we have Cheryl Garlock, an agency broker at CP Rochester. So we get together quarterly, just like we have these meetings quarterly, to kind of discuss what we want to present on, who we might be able to get to come in and speak. We collaborate with the liaisons to kind of see, is there things that we should make sure we're addressing. That said, in a couple slides, you'll see my email. We are always open to feedback on things that you think we should be covering or talking about, either as a small portion of one session or as the main topic for a community of practice session. So we would love to hear from you guys and on what you guys would like to get out of the broker community of practice. Sorry, my computer's not. Oh, there we go. There is a Facebook page that works kind of alongside the broker community of practice. So if you are not a member of the Facebook page, feel free to join. It does ask for your broker authorization number. If you're part of Region 1 and what you're hoping to get out of the group. So just make sure you do answer the questions, because I do not admit people that haven't answered those 3 questions. It's a great place to ask questions, network, just being careful that you're not sharing, of course, any HIPAA related information on that platform. The 2022 broker community of practice schedule is here.
There are more than 50 participants in the meeting.
So these are the upcoming sessions. Most likely they'll all be 10 to noon, but because they're not, there may be flexibility there. So I didn't put the times, but most likely these will be 10 to noon, and most likely they'll be Zoom, although we are looking for ways that we might be able to get maybe this summer some in-person networking together. As I mentioned, there is an email here if you want to send me an email on topics you would like the community of practice to discuss or consider for the remaining 3 sessions of the year. Just send me an email. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to transition this back over to Laura Clarion. She's going to present to us on transition from school age to adult services. I'll follow up with a summary afterward, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. But before I do that, it looks like Mary Terry has her hand up. Mary Terry, what do you have?
Hi, I just wanted to mention that we have 2 new liaisons that actually joined today. So I just wanted to introduce them so that you're aware. As you know, Katie Donahue transitioned into a different role within the regional office, but we also now have who has joined us, Courtney Lipinski. Her camera's on, so you can actually see her.
Hi, everyone.
And then Shiloh Dell, she's actually the call-in. She's currently, unfortunately, on a desktop, so she doesn't have all the gadgets yet to actually be able to talk and see. So, but both ladies have joined us and are transitioning to the role. Shiloh is also working with the Crow team as well. So she's kind of a 50%. She's actually kind of our new Kathy Bucciarelli. So, and then Courtney is our new Karen. So we welcome our two new liaisons, and as they get more comfortable in their role, you'll see more emails and you'll start to see at some point budgets with their names on them. So, okay, that's it.
Thanks, Mary Terry. Awesome. Welcome, ladies. We're excited to have some more folks on the Region 1 self-direction team. I know they've been running short for a little while, so it's great to have you ladies. All right. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura. So Laura, you guys, some of you, especially because Laura recognized many of your names, you probably recognize Laura's name. She's been around in the self-direction world for a long time. She's been a great mentor for me. I have learned so much from her, especially when it comes to person-centered planning. So I was really excited that she agreed to come and chat today about person-centered planning specific to supporting people who are leaving the school system and entering the adult service system. So Laura, did you want to go ahead? I can stop sharing if you want to share.
Yes, I'll work off of my PowerPoint because I made a couple other changes too at the 11th hour. So
Okay.
Let's see if I can actually do that.
I don't know if I stopped sharing.
Oh, it says
that's
host
it.
disabled participant screen sharing.
Let's fix that. All right, you should be good.
Hang on. This is always the most challenging part.
You know, I didn't realize when you are recording and sharing, about to share a screen, your face is like really big on the screen. And I didn't wear makeup last time, so this time I made sure.
Thank you for telling me, but yeah, that ship has sailed. So there we go. Now I got it. Okay, can you guys see that or?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for the introduction, Carissa. And like I said earlier, I feel with a lot of the people that I see on the screen, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I have been bordering on evangelical about the whole person-centered planning process for high school age kiddos for a long time. And so I'm really happy to be able to share some information with you today. For those of you that I don't know, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I worked at Kodak for 20 years. Where surprisingly, I was able to develop some skills that helped me in the broker world, developing teams, budgeting, identifying and working towards goals. I do have 3 children, including a daughter with ADHD and a son with Down syndrome and autism. Oh, and I should click. Let's see, how do I go to my next screen here? Ah, there we go, my introduction. I always take the opportunity to share pictures of Jimmy when I do presentations. But he's really the guy that taught me the most about transitioning from high school to adult life. We started his transition process at age 15 and really learned a lot along the way and have been very, very happy with his transition into adult life. I in the past worked with our local school district as a parent rep and also as their ties coordinator. And then in around 2006, I started doing person-centered planning at some of the local high schools for transitioning kids after going to an OPWDD class given by Beth Mount, which was hugely inspiring. So I was like, ooh, that sounds good. And we're going to apply that to Jimmy, and I can try to share some of that with other families as well. In 2008, I took my broker training and worked as a broker. So, and did that until 2020 when I decided to retire. But I still do some limited person-centered planning facilitation in one school district, the home district where Jimmy grew up. So I'm still in it a little tiny bit. But this guy, you know, this was kind of the jumping off point for Jimmy when he graduated from high school. And this is him probably a few months ago. So living his best life in his bedroom. So the transition to adult services, a lot of times parents describe it as falling off a cliff. The best pictures I could find were of the kayakers. So transition to adult services can sometimes feel like this if you're not prepared. A lot happens in a short amount of time, and person-centered planning will help you have your transition look more like this. You know, which would you prefer if you were the parent? I think there may be some adventure seekers amongst us, but most people would prefer a calm glide into adulthood. So when for school-age students, there's often two silos of activity. When brokers help the people that they serve to develop a self-directed budget, the first step of the process is to create a person-centered plan. You're working through OPWDD, and you create a circle of support for that person, and then identify strengths, barriers to success, health and safety needs, and goals for the future. In my experience, and I'm guessing many brokers that are the experienced brokers on this call, a lot of times people's circle of support are them, their parents, maybe a friend, family friend, or a grandparent, and then their broker, their care manager, and their FI. You know, occasionally people will have larger circles, but at least in my experience, when I was working, a lot of times people had fairly small circles of support. So once the plan is developed, then, and the budget gets written and approved, most of the things in the person-centered plan are incorporated in the life plan, and that life plan gets updated twice a year, as you know. Changes to goals will get built into the life plan. So that's your OPWDD silo. The other silo is the school or services silo. It typically consists of the folks that would be seen at a student's committee for special education meeting. So teachers, related service providers, school counselor, if there is one, school psychologist, and then obviously the student and the parents. As a student gets into high school, usually you'll see the transition coordinator join that team as well. So all of these people work together to make sure that all the things that are mandated by state education get done. But typically for kids, at least prior to high school, there's really two silos of activity. You know, some families will have the care manager come to their CSE meeting, but other than that, it's two silos of activity going on. So there's two mostly separate groups. That's what's covered here. And the student and the family are kind of the ones that connect those two groups and share information between them. Ideally, the student and the family are also the ones that carry and communicate the vision for the future to both of these groups. So ideally, they should be driving the whole process. sometimes what you see though is that many students and families kind of assume that their care manager and their school team are going to take care of things as they transition to adulthood and drive that process. And while technically that is true, I think if the parent and the student are able to take a more of a leadership role in that process and really kind of drive that process, that's going to help with your transition. So when you get to the transition years, there are many, many moving parts, lots of things that have to start and occur before the student transitions to adult services. So person-centered planning will help you keep track of those moving parts and ensure that everything that needs to happen will happen. And this is where you come in as the broker, or where you can come in as the broker. There are people out there like myself who do person-centered planning facilitation as a standalone service in school districts, but certainly it could be a broker role to facilitate this process for the student. So just something to keep in mind, that really you could be of great assistance to a student in helping them have a smooth transition. So all of this is, of course, in my opinion, but the keys to a smooth transition from school age services to adult services are time, knowledge, preparation, and accountability. As brokers, we're uniquely positioned to help the people we serve make this change in a way that is calm, thorough, and stress-free. So the primary goal of person-centered planning during transition is to expand the circle of support to blend the players from both silos together into a cohesive team, so that everybody has a clear picture of where the student wants to end up and what their role or roles are in the process. So as far as time goes, my recommendation is to start early. Typically, if a parent asks me the question, I would say that the latest I would want to start formal planning for the transition would be a student's freshman year. Obviously, people come to you after a student's freshman year, but I found that it's really good to start creating that team when the student gets to high school, so that the players know each other, so that we get used to fulfilling action items, you know, kind of slow and easy before the crazy senior year comes where there's tons of stuff going on. You want to give the circle time to really get to know the student, understand what their strengths and struggles are and what they like. So you want to identify goals for adulthood that incorporate all those things. You want to give a student a lot of time to try things out and figure out if they're a good fit or not. You want to develop relationships and trust among the circle of support. So when I say we should be starting freshman year, I don't mean that you have to have a gazillion meetings freshman year. Usually freshman, sophomore, even junior year, we're looking at a couple or 3 meetings a year. Typically what I'll recommend is a meeting at the beginning of the school year, a meeting kind of after January break, and then a meeting at the end of the school year. Once you hit senior year, I have found that it's very helpful to meet more frequently than that, every 4 to 8 weeks, just to make sure that things are rolling along. Some school teams are very willing and happy to do that. Others aren't as enthusiastic, so that's why it's the 4 to 8, you know, depending on how busy teams are and how valuable they feel that service will be to them, kind of directs how often that'll be. But there's definitely a lot going on senior year, so you want to make sure to meet frequently enough to cover action items and make sure stuff is getting done. The second important component is knowledge. Everybody on the circle brings different pieces of the puzzle to the planning process. As a broker, it's important to develop your knowledge of supports and services, but even more important is to develop your base of content experts. You, as a broker, don't really have to know it all, but it sure is helpful to know who the people are that do know it all. You know, I think the longer you provide broker services, the more contacts you have and the more information you learn. But as with any topic, knowing who to ask is just as important, if not more important, than knowing everything out of your own head. That said, I just listed a couple of places that I have personally found to be very useful in gaining knowledge, mostly in the form of webinars or things that get published. Starbridge has a great newsletter called Access for Young Adults with Disabilities. And I give you the link in the PowerPoint. There's also a group called Real Transition Partners in New York State. It's the New York State Transition Partners, and there's a website for them. And then there's also a group called the Regional Transition Collaborative that's run by New York State Department of Education. I wrote to the person that coordinates that. I was fortunate enough to be allowed to participate in that group. I'm not sure how she would feel if 100 brokers joined, but they do publish, they have a monthly meeting where they get speakers in, and they do record those meetings. So I'm hoping that I can get information on how people might be able to access those, because those are also very useful. And often the speakers are people that kind of aren't on the traditional broker radar. So they give a lot of good information on topics that might be kind of peripheral to what we do with brokers, but are good to know. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. OPWDD provides trainings, lots of agencies provide trainings, parent support. If anybody wants to unmute themselves, if there's if there are locations that you go to for good information on webinars or whatever, you can feel free to unmute yourself and chime in or not. And we can talk about that at the end at Connect when we do the questions as well. So the next area is preparation, which is where the rubber kind of hits the road. The life plan, I believe, is officially considered the individual's person-centered plan for OPWDD's purposes, but really a person-centered plan can go much, much deeper than the official life plan does. So really the person-centered plan should include all the areas involved in the adult life. There are many, many different approaches to doing person-centered planning. Everybody's got their own little spin on it. So it's certainly not my place to tell you how to do your person-centered planning. But beyond the vision, identification of action items is important. So that's where the next part comes in, accountability. I think sometimes we get very focused on creating a person-centered plan. And then when the plan is created, we're like, okay, that's done, check. We've got our person-centered plan. And one of the most important parts of the process, if you're actually working and coordinating a transition activity for a high school student, is accountability around action items. So when I'm doing person-centered planning with high school students, we always document action items and assign names to those people. So making sure that you follow up on those action items as you hold your meetings is super, super important. You know, people will learn very quickly that you're going to ask them at the next meeting about the stuff that they signed up for the previous time. So accountability is really what makes sure that what's supposed to happen happens. And I think people want to contribute on the circle of support. And so being able to let them report out on their action items and being reinforced for that is super, super important. So the person-centered plan, the way that I do it, we create a vision, and I think most people create a vision for health and safety, living, learning, earning, and relationships. And some people call those things different things, but in my mind, you want an umbrella that's going to cover all aspects of a student's life. So a broad sweep of what kinds of things you should make sure that you're addressing as a student transitions can be covered by these 5 items. So health and safety, some of the questions you need to consider are medical providers. You know, do I need to switch my medical providers to adult providers, which can be a huge, huge task. Parents will need to remember to fill out release forms with the doctors, because following age 18, you can sometimes run into difficulty having doctors talk to you if you don't have those release forms in place. You may want to make sure to set up supports for exercise, fitness, health. All of these things you can start getting into routines as the student is in high school, so that helps them then transition into adulthood. Parents are going to need to make a decision around guardianship or supported decision making. You need to make a decision around whether you're going to use a representative payee or not. You're going to want to get a formal New York State identification, so a driver's license or non-driver's ID. And you want to talk about what are the individual safety needs at home and in the community, and make sure that as you're thinking about what their adult life is going to look like, that you're able to cover those health and safety needs. As far as living is concerned, you got to think about residential stuff. What have the circle and the individual and their parents share? What are they thinking about where they're going to live when they enter the adult world? Are they going to continue to live at home? Oops, there should be a bullet there. Oops. Oh my God, now I'm getting off my thing. All right, well, we'll just keep talking. Pretend that the residential slide is still up. Do they want to live at home? Do they want to try to get into a traditional residential setting? That can be a challenge at times. Do they want a self-directed living arrangement? And if so, do they want to live alone or with others in an apartment, a townhome, a house? Do they want to rent or purchase a home? And then you also want to think about, if the individual will be living on their own, what supports do they need to do so? Parents often underestimate the amount of support their children are going to need when they first move out. A lot of times what you'll see is the first DDP2 you fill out after somebody has moved out on their own is, gee, maybe they're not quite as independent as we thought they were with some of these activities. So you don't really know what you know and don't know until you actually have to do it on your own. Another big topic is transportation. How are people going to get around? So do they want to learn to drive? Are they going to use public transportation? Are they going to use natural or paid supports to provide that transportation? So you want to think about those kinds of things, and what can you do to start start accessing those forms of transportation if you're talking about driving or using public transportation while the student's still in high school. And then are there other things that the individual needs in their living situation? So if they're going to live on their own, are there e-mods that they need? Is there adaptive technology out there that will help them? Are there other things that they need? That can be just about anything that would make them comfortable in an independent living situation. So for example, having a pet was always on my son's person-centered plan. You know, sounds silly, but that's very important to him. Another thing is you need to remember to register to vote if that's something that you want to do. So the next sections, I kind of combine them because there is a lot of overlap in these two sections when a student is in high school and preparing to transition. So for learning and earning, you want to make sure to take advantage of opportunities to explore career options during high school. There are so many ways to do that through volunteering, through job shadowing, having a part-time job. The Boy Scouts Explorers program is a wonderful program that high school age students can participate in. You want to try a bunch of those things and see how they go. And so that's another reason why starting person-centered planning early in the high school career gives you a chance to try those things, kind of process how they went and learn from them. There are many steps that are mandated by the New York State Department of Education relating to transition. It needs to be included on the student's IEP, and hopefully the transition coordinator at the high school is on, and the teacher is on top of all of these things. But it helps to be aware of what the things are that need to be happening. So level 1 and 2 assessments. There's a school transition document that typically gets filled out late junior year or early senior year. The school will be hooking the student up with Access VR, and if appropriate, they'll have a community-based assessment and a determination on whether Access VR is an appropriate provider for that student, all while they are in high school. Students can apply for Social Security starting at age 18. Money skills and financial training can start during high school and continue into adulthood. And then as you're thinking about what's going to happen in adulthood, there are many, many options or choices of what to do during the day once a student exits school. The student does not have to choose just one. So I haven't done a lot of budgets in the last 2 years, but I try to pull out of my memory. So again, hopefully brokers that are still in the thick of it can remind me if there's anything I've left off this list. But students can access natural supports, as they transition into adulthood. There may be things in the community that natural supports can help adults on our caseload to do. There are traditional day hab programs that can be center-based or without walls. I think there has been an interest for a bunch of years now in getting people out in the community doing volunteering and other things in ComHab situations. But I do believe there are also center-based programs still available. You can access Community Hab to support daytime and evening activities. They can be customized based on the individual's goals and interests. The circle, the individual, their parents will need to decide if they want to use traditional ComHab services purchased from an agency or if they want to go the self-directed route. There are college-based programs that students can access while they're still in high school. Many of our local colleges have different programs that are provided. Typically, when they are accessed prior to age 21, that's paid for by the district. Some of the programs, though, will go on for years beyond high school age students. So at that point, it's OPWDD funded. Project Search is a great program. And again, there are programs for high school students and there are programs for adults. There are other adult community learning programs. For example, Autism Up has a great program called the Full Life Academy. So that's another option. Some students want to participate in pre-vocational programs or pathways to employment. So there are those opportunities. And then for students that are ready, there are also employment programs. So this is where, if it's appropriate, a student would receive services through Access VR, which is not an OPWDD agency. You need to make sure that you knock on Access VR's door first and take advantage of their services if that's appropriate. OPWDD also has services such as supported employment or the enhanced training program. There's also a program that I just learned about fairly recently, I would say within the last year or so, called STEP, that's provided by Access VR. And that is a summer employment program for high school students, where Access VR actually provides supports for students with disabilities to work during the summer. So that's kind of a cool program as well. Did I forget anything? Does anybody want to?
Hey, Laura, this is Kirsten Miner.
Yes,
So,
hi, Kirsten.
how are you?
Good.
So this is kind of the sweet spot. Pretty much all of my broker portfolio is in the sweet spot. So to your earlier point about merging the silos, that's what I've navigated an awful lot with families recently. The family trusted the school and they were down the path of essentially without a high school diploma being placed in a project search. And the family didn't realize that means the individual's right on the cusp of employment, but it's counter to the fact that they did not get a diploma so that they would be able to take advantage of those 3 years of transition. So it's getting families together really quick so that they realize that in this case, the district would only be on the hook for that 1 year of project search because that placement deems that the person is ready for gainful employment after that year. So it's definitely a tricky one, but I found that you can bring an awful lot as a broker to the family, telling them that they're missing out on more Department of Ed school-based stuff unless they take advantage of that. And then on one other piece is Access VR is technically Department of Ed. So you really can't double dip. So if a student is still in 18 to 21 programming, they technically would not have an open case in Access VR because they're already getting support through the Department of Ed, with the exception of the pre-ETS program, which starts at age 14. It's kind of that heritage Christian supported program right now to support younger individuals 18 up to 21 get some skills before they graduate or before they end school-based stuff.
And I think that's the program that I'm calling STEP. But
actually, it's not. It's not. So STEP does exist, but there's also pre-ETS, which during COVID, it was 1-to-1. My son sat here on the computer and went through that. So, but they pushed in, it was Nate Morganti for a while. He pushed into all the local districts and was able to, with transition personnel in schools that heard what he had to offer, they took advantage of it, which is really good. So
yeah, I actually I spoke with Mary Ann Barton a few days ago, who is, I think, Nathan's not there anymore, so it was suggested that I talk to Mary Ann, and she said that she's probably going to kill me for saying this, but she said they don't have a lot of people enrolled in that program this year. So if brokers are on here and you have someone of high school age that could possibly benefit from that program, you may want to reach out to her and get some more information. But thank you for sharing that, Kirsten. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's keep rolling here. The last section is relationships, and in some ways, this is one of the more challenging ones for some people, at least in my experience, that this has been a challenging area. So, how can we ensure that the individual is connected with their community in adulthood, their family, their friends, their neighbors? What are their interests? And try, if you know what their interests are, try to organically connect them with the community to pursue those interests. So activities, classes, going to the gym, joining clubs, joining different groups of people with those disabilities and people without disabilities. I think inclusive situations are very, very important. And I think the ability to connect with people that experience some of the same challenges that you do can also be a really important facet of a person's adult life. You can, as a broker, you can help connect the students that you're working with social skills training if they have challenges in that area. Classes are out there about dating and relationships and sexuality, and all of those things are important for people in high school and as they transition to adulthood. So now I'm going to throw the ball back. I mean, I can answer questions now. Let's just throw the ball to Carissa. She's going to cover some of the more specific nitty gritty broker related technical questions. So over to you. I will unshare. Do you want me to unshare or do you want to work off my screen?
You can unshare because I think I made a few changes.
Okay, I will do that. Let's see. How do I unshare? So sorry.
I think
Oh, there it is. I got it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. It took me a second too when I was. All right, let me share mine now. Sorry about the random 60 up in the corner. I don't know if you guys can see that on my screen or if it's just showing up on mine. My son was playing with my monitor and I don't know what he did, but there's a random 60 that shows up on my left-hand corner on my my screen. But Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to go through all of that. It was definitely really helpful, either as a refresher for some of the brokers or I know we do have some newer brokers here too, so that might not have been at our person-centered planning session that we did. So I really appreciate you going through all of that. You guys can see the PowerPoint, right? I'm sharing the PowerPoint screen. And it's, I'm having the same issue as. Okay, so some of this is just going to be a summary for what Laura went through, but I want to kind of touch on those key pieces that as brokers you want to really keep in mind. So the role of the broker in transition, these are some of the key ones. One is being aware of when folks are transitioning out of school. And I know that might sound like, well, of course, but I've seen it happen more than once where we hit September and all of a sudden we realize they're not going back to school. What are we doing? Or we've had folks that started day hab and it was never added into their budget because none of the planning pieces really happened. The silos stayed separate and the broker was not aware of the plan, and there was not a lot of collaboration. So it's definitely happened where this big step just gets forgotten by the broker. You just don't realize that they've are at transition age, and then we really got to get some planning going and some budget changes going. The other piece as a broker is working closely with a circle of support to ensure folks have access to the information they need to make an informed choice about life after high school. So this is really what Laura was talking about, doing that in-depth planning. Are people really aware of what the options are? And are we really supporting a comprehensive plan that's looking at more than just what are they going to do during the day? Are we talking about where do they want to live? Are they going to stay with mom and dad for a few more years? Are they ready to kind of step out on their own? Are they looking for certified type programs? Are they looking for some consistency, something every day, Monday through Friday, or do they want to change it up a little bit? But you really just want to make sure you're expanding your knowledge base as a broker, so you know some of the options that are out there, that you're getting some of those, that you're making sure like there's other experts in the room, you know, as a care manager, fully informed of what's available after high school, and are they attending these meetings, and are they a part of the planning? And like Laura said, are there who's doing what? Are you guys actually making the plan and then making sure that the everyone knows what they're doing and that everyone is doing what they said that they would do? If DayHab's being pursued, you want to make sure, well, who's filling out the referral for DayHab and how are we going to know that it's done? So making sure that not only do you have the plan, but you're actually people are following up on that plan, and that people are making informed choices when it comes to what they want to do after they leave the school system. Another piece is ensuring discussion about transition happens in a timely manner. So again, Laura did touch on this. We don't want to wait until May of the year that they turn 21 and they're leaving the school system. It's really too late then. Could you possibly pull together something in that short time? Possibly. Is it going to be person-centered? Are they going to be happy with it? Is it going to be well done? Probably not. It's a little too late. So it's really making sure that those conversations are happening early on. 14, or that high school age, like Laura said, just starting high school, that's a great age to start the discussions, because there's so many pieces that can be done then to help prepare them for what they want to do after high school. Things like if they want to learn how to drive, knowing that ahead of time is helpful, because then we can make goals and supports around getting their permit and getting their license. If we know that they want to work after high school, we can make sure that the things that they're doing in school and perhaps the things that they're doing at home support that goal, and that we're working on helping that happen. So we do want to make sure that the discussions are happening early. And really that year that the person's transitioning out of school services, you want to make sure you're meeting pretty regularly. So you want to make sure that, again, you're not just trying to throw everything together in one meeting in April or May, that you really are having those discussions throughout the year, that you're in close communication. It doesn't always have to be meetings, but just making sure that you are having very good communication and collaboration with the team, so that everybody's on the same page, everyone knows what needs to happen, everyone's doing their role, and that can help make sure that instead of that canoe going over the edge of the waterfall, you've got smooth sailing to ensure that it's a smooth transition. And then finally, of course, because you're the broker, you're going to make sure that that budget is updated to reflect the services that they're choosing to go through. So when someone leaves school and they're no longer eligible for New York State education funding, their PRA, their funding amount, will go up 60%. But of course, now a lot more services have to be included in that budget than previously had to be included, which we'll chat about. So you're going to want to make sure that that budget's completed, updated, reflective of the services that they're going to be accessing, and that it's submitted to the FI and then to the state in a timely manner, so that those services are ready to go when they transition out of high school. So when can a child access their full PRA? when they have exited the school system. This can be a little bit confusing for some families, because a lot of times I'll ask a family when the child graduates. And a lot of times the answer is, oh, well, they're graduating at 18. Because a lot of times kids are walking the stage at 18, but they might still be staying in the school system a little longer than that, because many kids who are unable to graduate with their diploma at the end of their 12th grade year, if they have an IEP and are receiving special education services, they can stay in the school system up through the year, the school year in which they turn 21. So as far as when can they get their full PRA, it's either when they graduate with their local or Regents diploma. So that could be 18, that could be at the end of 12th grade, that could be maybe they just need one extra year and they get their local or Regents diploma. But when they get their local or Regents diploma, or again, for many kids that we are supporting, it's the school year in which they're turning 21. So if they turn 21 between the first day of school, so I know that changes every year, it could be September 6th, it could be September 10th, but between that day and the last day of that school year in June, so say June 25th or whatever it is, it's usually, you know, that fourth week of June. If they turn 21 at any point in that year, they can stay in the school after turning 21, but at the end of that school year that they turned 21, that's generally when they're going to be transitioning out of school-based services and into OPWDD services, and that's when they would have access to their full PRA. If they turn 21 in the summer, so let's say they turn 21 August 5th, that usually falls within the summer school, 6-week summer school year, they will get to stay through that summer school, usually if they qualify for summer services. There's going to be some kiddos that don't qualify. But they would then be able to keep the school-based services up until that summer school session ends, and then they would technically transition to adult services in the fall. So the summer birthdays often get to keep that summer school that one last summer. Again, there are some kiddos who just aren't going to qualify for summer services, so they would also end their school career when they that previous June. So I know that's a little complicated, but primarily what you're looking at when a parent says their child's graduating at 18 is trying to clarify, are they graduating with a local or Regents diploma, or are they then going on to school-based transition program? And if they are going on to school-based transition programs up through age 21, they will still keep their smaller PRA, the reduced PRA, until they truly are done with New York State education services other than Access VR, like Kristen was saying. So what happens when someone doesn't feel their needs are being met at school and want to transition to OPWDD funding earlier? And I have seen this probably a handful of times where either the family just feels like the school isn't meeting their needs and would like to transition to really mostly having their full PRA, their full funding amount, or sometimes the child themselves is like, I'm done. I am 18. I do not want to be in the school building anymore. I don't want anything to do with the school building. I want to be done. So then they might be the one advocating to end school services. And a third situation is where the school truly is just not able to meet their needs anymore. In all of those cases, number one, don't promise anything, because it is very unlikely that they will be able to access full OPWDD services prior to being done with the school age service systems, but it's not impossible. This is where they would really want to work with their care manager, and their care manager would work with the DDRO and OPWDD to see whether or not the child is eligible for additional OPWDD services or not. And again, it's very, very rare that they would be approved to exit school early and start adult OPW services early. But if it's something that they really feel strongly about, I guess as a broker, your role would really be to refer them back to their care manager, and their care manager can work with OPWDD. There's some options there, but I won't go through all of them because it is pretty rare scenario. You know, a lot of times schools are providing sufficient services that people do want to stay in the school-based services for as long as they can. So as far as, again, when a child can get their full PRA, when they can get that 60% increase, it is when either they graduate their local or Regents diploma, or they end of the year in which they turned 21. So broker specific information. This is a few things just when you look at the self-direction budget that you're going to want to be aware of. I'm sure most of this is review for some of you, but it's just a good quick review. So remember, in order to access that full funding, the big question that you have to answer correctly is the 3 criteria question, which is basically, is the person living with family? Are they attending school? Mary Terry, what's the third question?
Less than 22, right?
Is it less than 22? Yeah, okay, that's what I was thinking it was, and I was like, wait, but it's not, but it is less than 22. So keep in mind that question has to be, if any one of those is, now I'm losing how it's worded, not true. So let's say the person is 18, but still in school and moves out. They may be eligible to get their full PRA because they're no longer living at home. So now one of those questions is no longer true. So they could possibly access additional funding if they're moving out on their own. Not often that we see that, but there are some folks who do end up moving out on their own a little earlier. If someone is 18 and they've graduated with their full Regents diploma, again, the answer is going to be no, and they will be eligible for their services because they have graduated. Even though they're under the age of 22, they have their diploma, they're done with school services. So they could access their full PRA at that younger age. I think those are the main scenarios where someone under the age of 22 might be able to access their PRAs if they have their Regents or local diploma, or if they've moved out and are living in their own place and not with caregivers anymore. So again, make sure you answer that question correctly. I've definitely seen some budgets come through that for a 5 or 6 year old, they've answered the question in a way that the person gets their full PRA, and I'll have a budget for $100,000 for a 6-year-old. So just that question is really important when it comes down to the funding. So just making sure you're answering it accurately. And if you're really not sure what the correct answer is, work with the FI, and they'll often know how to answer the question because it is so crucial to funding. The other piece is what type of budget is described in this document. So very often for kids, we're seeing, and they teach this in BTI, you're seeing a both budget for a kiddo. That's usually what you're having when the child is still in school, because it gives them the most funding and they don't have a lot of daytime services that they would have to build in. So it would just make sense to do a both budget. That said, when someone's transitioning out of high school and entering the adult world, a both budget might not make sense anymore, especially if they're going to be accessing rather expensive daytime services. So if someone's going to be leaving school and going to dayhab 5 days a week, a both budget does not make sense. I've seen a lot of them lately, and I don't understand why people build five full dayhab days into a budget, because what you're really doing in most cases is eating up a whole bunch of the PRA on those daytime services. Whereas if you switched it to a residential only budget where you don't have to build in supported employment or dayhab or pre-voc, a lot of times the person ends up with a lot more funding available to them for their evening and weekend and early morning supports. So it is really important to, as a broker, really get a strong grasp on the 3 different budget types so you can help the person make an informed choice on what makes the most sense. Generally speaking, more than 2 days a dayhab, it doesn't generally make sense to do a both budget. Sometimes it does. And there, dayhabs vary by the dayhab as far as the cost. So there are some dayhabs that are over $200 a day. I think a lot of times those are DDRO run dayhabs. There are other dayhabs that are non-certified that run closer to $130 a day. So you want to do the math. What makes the most sense? The math that I do is usually I pull the PRA for a both budget. I pull the PRA for a res budget. I subtract the res from the both and figure out how much money it is. So let's say it's $20,000 between the difference between a both budget and a res only budget. And then I look at the cost of that daytime support. So if it's dayhab and dayhab costs $30,000, it doesn't make any sense at all to do a both budget, because now there's only a $20,000 difference between the res only and the both. So again, it can be a little bit of a complicated concept, but if those day services cost more than the difference between a res only and a both budget type, it does not make sense to put or to do a both budget. You know, some FIs will catch it and will question it, but there's other times where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to assume you've had the person-centered planning, and then if you want 5 days a day have in your budget, I mean, I will try to talk it through and make, but there are sometimes reasons people might do that. Generally, it does not make sense financially to do that. So again, get a good concept of the different budget options and support the person to figure out which budget type makes the most sense for them. So the other piece on this demographic page that you want to pay attention to, that's an important question, is the services requested. So a lot of times as folks are transitioning into their high school, out of high school services and into adult services, they're accessing different services or new services. So you do want to go through those yes and no questions on the budget, or if you use a Vero, the check marks where you check the different services that the person wants. You want to make sure that that reflects all of their services if it's a both budget, and at least they're, but again, if it's a res only, you don't need to put day hab, you don't need to put pre-voc, you don't need to put supported employment in the res only budget. But if they had a both, you may need to switch it to a res only if you are going to be using, if the person's going to be using a lot of those services. So it's a lot of information I threw at you, but we'll have time for questions, I promise. So a couple other things to keep in mind is there's 2 different budget pages in the budget for services that are provided by an agency, generally other than the FI, but sometimes by the same agency, but not through the FI itself, through a different department at that agency. But there's agency supported self-directed and there's direct provider purchase, 2 totally different pages on the budget template. And this is where a pretty common error that we see, where something that's direct provider purchased ends up on the agency page, agency supported self-directed page, or something on the agency supported self-directed page ends up in the direct provider page. There's very little difference between these 2 services. I'm going to use Community Hub as the example because that's the most common one that might be agency supported self-directed. Essentially, you can have Community Hub that's self-hired, but we're not going to talk about that now. Or you can have Community Hub that's agency supported self-directed, or you can have Community Hub that's direct provider purchased. The big difference between agency supported self-directed Community Hub and direct provider purchased Community Hub is whether or not there's a memorandum of understanding between the person and the agency that says the person is choosing their staff, interviewing their staff, and has a say in who their staff is. That is agency supported self-directed. When the person is signing an MOU with the agency providing the Community Hub saying that they want to choose who to hire. Because it's agency supported and not self-hired, they still don't get to choose the pay rate. The agency is still choosing the pay rate, but they are taking a more active role in interviewing who it is that might support them. Truly, in practice, there is a very little difference between these 2 services. And in most cases, even with direct provider, an agency is not going to just send a staff over there and say, hey, this is who you're stuck with. The person's still going to have a say on whether or not they want to work with that person. So it is very likely that neither the care coordinator nor the person is going to have any idea if the Community Hub they're receiving is direct provider or agency supported. You are most likely going to have to contact the agency to figure out, is there an MOU or not? And which one are we putting in the budget? So just keep in mind, that's a provider question. And it mostly applies to probably in-home respite or Community Hub. And it's not an answer you're going to be able to find just looking at a life plan or even just looking in choices, I don't think. I think you really are going to have to reach out to the provider to make sure it's going on the right budget page. As always, make sure that the rates you're using for the services that you're putting on agency supported or direct provider purchased services are correct. So they've gone up a couple times and been retroactive to April 1st. Most recently, I think just a couple of weeks ago, the rates went up. So just always use the website link here to figure out which rate to use. I know that website can be a little complicated to navigate if you're not used to it. So feel free to reach out to the FI coordinator, feel free to reach out on the broker support Facebook page, feel free to reach out to the liaison, just if you're really not sure which rate to be using, but it will hold things up if the rate's wrong. You do, risk it being the budget being rejected, it will be rejected and sent back to you for corrections. So do make sure you're double checking the rates for any of those services that are being provided by direct provider agencies or agency supported agencies. And OTPS is another for broker things to keep in mind. There could be changes to OTPS. So as you know, there's certain things in OTPS, certain categories that are only available to those who are 18. So this could happen before the kiddos transitioning from school, but it is happening in that transition planning year, where they may be able to build in additional pieces to their budget in OTPS. So for instance, internet is generally reserved just for folks who are over the age of 18. So if someone's under the age of 18 and living at home with their family, it's unlikely they're going to be able to get internet in their budget. If they're 18 or older, you may be able to build their portion of the internet into the budget once they turn 18, even if they're still living at home. Same for clothing. So clothing is one of those other ones that the self-direction guidance indicates is just for those who are over the age of 18. So you may be able to add that when they turn 18. As far as utilities, work with your FI. Some FIs do automatically allow utilities once the person turns 18. Other FIs require substantial documentation to show how that need for utilities is directly related to their disability, or may have other standards for building that in. As far as housing, that, we've covered housing a lot in the community of practice over the last year. They would not be eligible for a housing subsidy unless they did move out of their parents' home. I mean, there's some rare circumstances where maybe the parents live in a duplex and the child's moving over to the other half of the duplex, and it really does meet the housing guidance. But kids cannot, I'm saying kids, but I know these are adults as they're turning 18, are not eligible for a housing subsidy if they're just for like a bedroom in their parents' home or something. So I swear I thought there was another page. I guess that was everything. A couple things I want to show you before we jump into questions are some excellent resources that Lynn Barnett pulled up that I will send out, I promise, with the certificate that you guys attended today, or the email saying you guys attended. So this is just the OPWDD flyer about transition, and it's got some helpful information that you may want to share with families. Some great resources there. The next one is a guide that you could use as a broker if you are trying to do some of that person-centered planning that Laura talked about. If you're trying to make sure we're having those conversations, that people are making informed choices. So we've got, dude, where's my transition plan? But it's got some information about transition, things to consider, and there's some worksheets down below as well that you can use to help with transition. And then another resource here is another tool that, again, you guys could use with folks as they're hitting that transition age. And again, it's got some information as well as some worksheets to kind of work through. And you could always pick and choose certain pages. It's not like you have to work start to finish on any of these. But I do know that sometimes the lack of person-centered planning is just because we don't know where to start. So these tools might kind of help you out with getting started. We also have our little broker cheat sheet that Lynn created. This was just kind of out of our brainstorming session on some of the things that you as a broker just want to make sure you're keeping in mind as people are transitioning out of high school. Making sure we're planning ahead, figuring out if they're eligible for that full PRA or not. I see a lot of mistakes with this one, again, because it's complicated. People think, well, they walked the stage, they graduated, but did they really graduate from school services? Or are they still getting some school-based services because they're not yet 21 and didn't get a diploma? When should the budget be submitted? So this question might be more one that the liaisons can chime in on. Last year, I would have said really early. Now they're coming back super speed. In general, if the kid transitions out during the typical school year and not summer, they're not eligible for that full PRA until July 1st. So you would probably want to submit it sometime in June. But I'll let the liaison say for sure in a second. If they're staying in school-based services through summer, they would be eligible for that full PRA in September, September 1st for that budget year. But I see Mary Terry's face. I can't see any of the other liaisons. Do you want to chime in on when the best time to get that budget to you is?
Actually, yeah, I'm going to chime in actually on a few things. So yes, that is correct. You should have the budget submitted in June. And we wouldn't put it up until June 16th so that it would get a July 1st effective date. So there's that piece. And then I want to backtrack. When you mentioned the reimbursement rate site, you mentioned about between agency supported and direct provider. The rates are the same no matter what. It's a matter of where it's placed in the actual budget template. So that's, I just wanted to clarify that because I'm like, the rates are the rates, no matter whether they're agency supported or direct provider, they're the same, doesn't matter. It's just a matter of where it's actually placed in the budget. So if it's on the agency supported tab or if it's on the direct provider tab, that's the difference between the two. That's all.
Perfect. Yeah, I think with rates, I probably I meant more Dayhab. Dayhab is where you want to look for.
I was just gonna say, I made the mistake. I did that PowerPoint and I was thinking Dayhabs because those rates do vary.
They're very per
Significantly.
agency, correct. And so are the few that are still provide site-based pre-voke. Those still have a site specific as well. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same. And everyone is aware that the rates changed back in. Therefore, make sure your budgets are up to par with the correct rates, please. Thank you.
Carissa, I can correct the PowerPoint. If you're gonna send that out, I'll correct that piece.
Yeah,
before
just
you
clarify
send
that.
it.
Yeah, that the rates that
The
you're.
rates differences are for Dayhab and site-based pre-voke. Is that what you said, Mary Terry?
Mhm. There's
Okay.
there's not a ton of people that use site-based anymore, but there are still
Yeah.
some. So
Okay.
the other piece for rates that you want to keep an eye on is so a lot of folks have transitioned from that site-based pre-voke to the community-based pre-voke. Community-based pre-voke, and same with supported employment, and really ComHab, but that's less likely, is that they have a group rate and a one-to-one rate. So you really want to make sure that if you are building any pre-voke or supported employment into the budget, and even pathways, a lot of these services have a different rate based on is it being provided one-to-one or is it being provided to a group. You're going to want to work with the provider or at least have the care manager work with the provider to figure out how much in that budget should be built in at one-to-one and how much of it should be built in at group, because those are two different rates. So again, that's just another piece where you don't want to rush this process and be trying to scramble in May. You really want to make sure you're having some of these conversations, because in my experience, providers aren't always so quick and they don't even always know off the bat how much of each to put in. We want to make sure they know that we need to know that if we're going to put it in the budget. So just have those conversations on how much of this service is one-to-one, how much is it a pre-voke. Some services too are making it nice and complex and they're blending. They have some community pre-voke and they have some supported employment, and some community pre-voke is one-to-one and some is group, and some supported employment is group and some of it's one-to-one. So it can be very complicated as a broker to get it right. That's why we don't want to rush. That's why we want to make sure we're taking our time. And if you are a brand new broker who has no idea what I'm talking about right now, that's why you want to work with your FI as well and the care manager, just to make sure that we're getting that budget to reflect what it is the person's going to be using when they leave the high school. But there's that flexibility too. Just realize whatever that plan that you came up with, maybe the original plan was 5 days a week a Dayhab. People change. They might start that Dayhab and be like, whoa, this is not for me. I don't like this. So that person-centered plan should be flexible. We should be revisiting it and going back to the person and figuring out, is this really what you wanted? Are you happy? Is this working for you? And if it's not, thankfully budgets are flexible and we can be flexible, and we should be making sure that we're changing that budget as needed to ensure that what they want to do is what the funding is supporting. So, and again, as a broker, you want to make sure that you are having a solid grasp of, is it a residential or both budget, which one makes the most sense? And this is really a common error. I'm seeing a lot of budgets that have come across my desk lately. Just make sure you really understand that the benefits, what services have to go into each, and which one will make the best sense. And if you don't know, it's fine. Just make sure you are reaching out to someone who does know and can help you figure that out. Make sure the self-direction incorporates the services that are necessary based on the type of budget. So this does say all services, but the self-direction budget doesn't have to include all services. If, let's say, it's a residential only budget, it only needs to include the services that are meeting their residential needs, their respite, their community hab, their OTPS and IDGS, that sort of stuff. But it doesn't need to include, if it's a res only, their day hab or their support employment or their community pre-voc or their pathways to employment. Those can all be left out. But if it is a both budget, if that's what the person opts for, you do need to make sure it's comprehensive of all of their services. And one way to double check that is asking the FI or the care manager to pull the CR4 or the tabs inquiry for you. That will list on that first page all of the services the person's enrolled in. Now there is that chance, because like we're talking about, this is transition, that we're trying to make this budget match what it is that they're going to have effective July 1st. So there's a chance they're not yet enrolled in the service. Again, that's where you're just working with the FI, working with the care manager, working with a provider, so you understand what needs to be in that budget when they leave school. And then just as a broker, just making sure that you're taking opportunities to learn about what sorts of services are out there, so that you can help make sure the person's making an informed choice with what services they're accessing as they leave the school district. So these resources that I just went over, I will send to you. One other resource I thought about that I wanted to mention is, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, is the Life After High School program through Starbridge. I think it's all virtual right now, but maybe they'll be trying to get back into in-person soon. Be aware it is an FSS service, so it does have to go into the budget, but it is a really great program for folks who are transitioning out of high school. I think it's for ages 14 or 15 and up, but they have a great curriculum that will help, that could help support the person with understanding what's available after high school, and kind of planning for their own future. So that might be a service that you could recommend. Again, it does have to go into the budget. And the other thing I want to do before we jump into questions is even just kind of an open discussion. I know it's awkward when we got 56 people in the meeting, but just on some of the things that you've seen as far as transition. So I'll get it going with an example. I supported someone who, when I first supported him, he was living at home, still in school, mom and dad. At transition, he moved into a group home and started a day hab 5 days a week. And what we saw was pretty significant decline in his happiness. and it was reflected a lot in how he was treating other people and how he was interacting with other people. So his behavior really changed a lot as well. And there were some pretty significant concerns. And over the years, there was a lot of, the family didn't really understand self-direction, felt their child wasn't really capable of self-direction. And at one point it told me, never talk about self-direction again to me. I don't want to hear it. But I knew in my heart, like, this is what this young adult needed, was some more choice and control in his life. Ultimately, it was just so clear he was not thriving and not happy. And the parents did come back to me and say, you know what, maybe we do need to look at self-direction as an option for him. So they pulled him out of day hab and they pulled him out of the group home as well. And he moved back home. And we did a lot of person-centered planning to figure out what it was that he really wanted to do during the day. And we created a self-directed budget. It was a both budget, with most of the focus being during the day. So most of the funding really was for things that he was doing Monday through Friday during the day. And then his parents were providing a lot of the weekend and evening support because now he was living at home. And we created a schedule, and Monday through Friday, he had incorporated all of the things that meant something to him or were important. So things like music classes and horseback riding and going to the library. He had a really pretty consistent schedule. He was able to hire a self-hired staff at a really decent rate, which allowed them to keep that staff and retain that staff. So they did self-hired staffing throughout the day. And truly all of the challenges we were seeing and the misery that he was showing us went away as he had choice and control over what he was doing all day long. And any of the behavior things that we were seeing, they were gone. So it really was a great example of being flexible, making sure we're listening, making sure that we are trying to support the person to make that informed choice and what they want to do with their day. So I don't know if anyone has any other examples or thoughts of transition or even tips. I know we've got a lot of experienced brokers, so feel free to unmute if you want, or raise your hand if you want.
So I have a question about that scenario that you just talked about. I have a lot of families that are very hesitant to do self-direction because of the question that happens when mom and dad can no longer take care of the individual. What happens to that self-direction plan that's in place? Are there any, I mean, obviously housing would be an issue, but are there any programs to help keep a self-direction budget going once mom and dad are no longer to manage that?
So that's the that's a big question that we do hear a lot. And Laura will probably be able to touch on this some. Part of it really is that person-centered planning, building up those natural support networks as well. In some of these cases, I often see siblings are willing and able and want to be able to provide that support after the parents are no longer able to. That's not always going to be the case for everyone, but I'm gonna let Laura chime in because I know this is something that she's working on, networking with some other parents to kind of figure out how can we get through this.
Right, I'm working on getting together a group of families who have children who are living independently in the community, but certainly this is an issue whether your child lives in the community or is living at home. What happens after the parents can't support them? So haven't totally figured it out yet. People have suggested like a lead ComHab staff. We're thinking about maybe doing something independently, like an advocate that we would identify for our son for after we're gone. But it is a sticky issue, and it is an issue that concerns a lot of parents about self-direction. I think parents need to recognize that not every, with the current support available as far as group homes is concerned, just assuming you're gonna have your kid live in a group home is not maybe gonna happen right away, if at all. And so figuring out ways to keep things going after you as the parent are gone is very important. And I think something that a lot of people are wrestling with. So hopefully we'll have some good answers for people. We'll figure out some creative solutions and be able to share some information a little bit down the road. It certainly is a hot topic, I'll tell you that. I put one little thing out on the Region 1 self-direction page and holy cow, I got bombarded. So I think it's a hot topic that a lot of people want to figure out how to address. So, but I don't have a good answer right now.
There is a New York Alliance resource packet as well that's free. I think you can probably download it from their website, but it's titled something like "What Happens When I'm No Longer There?" Something along those lines. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat, but it has some resources as well. But Kirsten, I saw your hand up if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I have the bulk of my, I mean, small, but the bulk of my broker case is all parents and families of kids in this age range. And I've lobbed the kind of the bait out to most of the families of, should I start creating some kind of a community of, it's sort of like if you watch Shark Tank, and there's some of those Shark Tank people that Barbara, she brings everybody to her little ski lodge and they all kind of get to know each other. So how do you start bolting these people into kind of an organic group, because they all kind of are living that same life? And by nature of that, you can make some additional connections and grow those circles. So there's that piece. And then it's, you know, discussions as it relates to, and I'm not plugging, but upstate special needs planning, and having those discussions of, you know, the financial side plays into the SSI versus, you know, the other OPWDD supports. How does that all look, and what can you, if you want, buy as a supported service, and what is necessary to have, you know, named guardians, named trustees name different things. So it's just keeping those conversations really fluid with families as their kids are aging through this and starting, well, maybe that could be a logical first roommate, and, you know, build those relationships.
Great, thank you. And I did throw the what happens when I'm gone is the correct title of the resource that the New York Alliance came out with. So I've put a link to the PDF in the chat if you guys want to pull that out and maybe share it with some families. Anyone else have tips or questions, or more so maybe examples of things that you've seen or done with supporting people with transition? Kim.
Yeah, I have a couple, and family I'm working with right now, the young lady's going to be transitioning out this June, and what I'm seeing is like they're getting to the decision-making process so late, you know, that you don't even know if it's going to be pre-voc, if it's going to be, you know, what are we looking at? And I just feel like some of that falls on the school system because the options aren't presented, you know, with the transitions, conversations aren't happening early enough. So, and having a list of what's out there, you know, there's Life Press at NAS, you know, all the adult transition type programs versus the school age transition programs is a thing for me that I would like to know more about. I know there's, you know, school age project searches, and then there's adult project searches. So there's like, you know, so much out there. It's really get tricky to know what to refer a family to, and hopefully the care managers, you know a lot about that too. So that's just a comment. And then the other thing I wanted to touch upon the budget type a minute. We had talked about the res only versus the other. Like I've had a couple people that I have kept them on both and put their direct provider, like maybe their SEP services or pre-voc services on direct provider purchase, because their budget is so unutilized that it doesn't make a difference. Like, you know, to put I haven't done amendments because of that fact, because they're not using much of it at all. So I'm just making a comment to that, if that makes sense at all. Like, you know, in my broker career, which is only a couple of years old, I have yet to see a fully utilized budget. I don't know if any other broker you've seen them. Yeah, and I haven't, so they're out there, I'm sure.
We
So
use every single penny of our budget for
well,
Jimmy every single
awesome.
year. So
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's probably a testament to what you know, because you know how to use it.
well, no, actually, the bulk, like I would say 98% of his budget is staff, because he lives
Yeah,
independently in the
right.
community.
And
And
that's
so,
the big transition, right? That's when the PRA goes up. That's
yeah.
where 90% of the PRA increase goes to, is staffing typically, right? Yeah. And then my third thing I just wanted to ask about this transition packet that I think some care managers know about, and some, like, what is it? So it has the transition packet. There was some information going back and forth in the chat about it. And I thought maybe somebody could explain that a little bit better, so I understand it. Just when should they start it? Do all the care managers know about it?
So I think it's supposed to be a year before they graduate, or like are leaving or school, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe there's a care manager on here that can fill us in. I only remember when I was an MSc, and that was long enough ago. I know it's changed.
is it something that the school fills out, or the care manager?
Madeline was going to say something, I think.
Oh yeah, I was a care manager as of January. The transition survey can be started pretty much anytime, either at least a year before the person transitions out, but they suggest kind of earlier if they're going until 21. If they're going until 18, then at least a year before. But if after they turn 18, they're not transitioning until 21, you can wait till after that. And it's a transition survey, basically stating what you're anticipating being able to utilize, what you want to utilize after you hit adult services, asking what kind of level of supports that they have, and then you include the IEP life plan and any additional documentation to kind of give people an idea of what adult services you'd be looking for once the school district is no longer responsible for the person.
And is that like go to the liaison at the same time the budget amendment goes to liaison? I'm like, are we as brokers to package all that up nicely together, or you guys are, you send it, we send our stuff, and then the liaison gets everything they need?
So the contact that's listed on the transition survey is not, if I recall, is not a self-direction liaison. It's a specific like transition person at OPWDD.
Yeah, I think the
Dean
point
Snyder.
is it Snyder? Yeah, I think the point is to kind of make sure families aren't thinking they're going to get day-hab when they're not even eligible for day-hab. So I think a lot of us to catch that ahead of time so that families actually have an idea, and schools too, maybe, of what the person's actually eligible for. So if the care coordinator submits it and it says they're going for day-hab and they have a DDP2 score, an ISPM of a 1, the DDRO can quickly say, oh, day-hab's probably not an option. Let's talk about some other, you need to look at other options. At least that's.
Oh, so it's more of a planning tool so the families know, because I think I had a budget last year that was like held up because I didn't have the transition packet that can get sent in.
Yeah, and it's also to make sure that these conversations are happening, because we don't want someone to hit July 1st and have absolutely nothing. That would not be ideal at all. So.
Okay, so I mean, it's okay for us as brokers to kind of say, hey, did you start the, is it called transition packet or assessment? Like what exactly?
It really should fall more on the care manager just to be doing.
Oh, I know, but
Right.
sometimes they need a little, if they're new, they might need a reminder. So is it
Is
something?
the
we-
transition
That's why I
survey-
went through that comprehensive, what I hope was comprehensive, it may not be all inclusive list of things that should be happening during
Okay.
the high school years, because you do get new people. And so as a broker, if you can educate yourself as to what should be happening across the spectrum of disciplines, that's going to help you help your client
Well,
to
yeah.
have a smoother transition.
Right, because you just don't want to
So it's good that
surprise.
you're asking about the packet.
Yeah,
Um,
the surprise delay is never good because the parents don't like it. Yeah,
Right.
so.
I mean,
Okay.
I will say that the transition survey is something that kind of gets brushed aside because it's like, especially if somebody's going on an untraditional route, you kind of get lost in the sauce sometimes.
Mm.
Like great to ask, but I also encourage, like when I was a care manager, I would also encourage anybody that I mentored to try to get in on those school meetings as much as possible, because a lot of the stuff can be done by the school, like the Access VR referrals, and that can all really boost that transition portion forward.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in, and I think what also seems to happen is the school thinks of transition as, if the individual is not graduating, what are we doing to bridge potential 18 to 21 services? They call that transition. But formally, from an OPWDD perspective, transition is really, you are done with school and now you're going to be in adult-based services. And those timeframes can be 3 years difference. So the family hears the word transition and they may be thinking what the school personnel is saying. They may not realize in this other silo of OPWDD, it's an entirely different thing. And then it's that whole exit summary of summarizing the individuals, kind of where they've been and where are their strengths. That's part of that exit summary thing, which I've seen holds up the transition stuff being forwarded to Christine Snyder or OPWDD, because they from a school district perspective are not eligible to release that information until it's pretty much the end of the last day or month of school as a 21-year-old. So that there's that confusing piece that I don't think families know. So that's a comment. Question that maybe is for the liaisons, partly because there's a few families that I work with, they're frustrated about what they can't get from self-direction. So then therefore they don't use it. And then I've got other families who thinks self-direction is amazing, but yet they don't realize self-direction means that they kind of need to be pacing and pushing themselves. I can't do everything the parent needs to do, even though I think they'd like me to. They think I'm being, paid this amazing amount of money to self-direct them when they're supposed to be learning how to self-direct. So do you have a sense, or do you ever do any math on, the motivated families like the Kadarians that get it, and they know that they're going to help Jimmy the most if they use his budget to make his life the best it can be? And then there's those other families that wanted to be self-directed and maybe they use 1% of their budget. Do you have math on any of that stuff? Or is that a rhetorical question that's just something to ponder?
Well, the FIs, whoa. Sorry about that. Mary Terry, you're gonna have to answer. My audio is horrendous.
So it's like the voice of God coming down.
Oh, you're muted, Mary Terry, if you are answering.
I was muted for a reason. I'm not sure what Sue was trying to get at, honestly. I don't know what she's trying to do.
So can I jump in while you're figuring
Go
it
for
out?
it, 'cause I think
too?
she's got her phone on and it's through the computers. She's got both going on at the same time.
Okay. Well, Kirsten, the only thing I would say there is that I think the broker cannot play a big role in helping individuals to utilize their budget to a full extent. Encouraging them to find ComHab staff. That was a big one when I was a broker, that we'd build in these ComHab staff budgets and respite budgets. And then parents would say, well, I can't find any staff. So that whole big chunk of the budget would go unused. So helping them to connect with different resources to try and find staff, and encouraging them to try somebody out. I think a lot of parents are concerned about strangers working with their kids. So, you can start if your child's in high school and still living with you, they can come and work with your child while you're home if you have a concern about safety, until you build that trust factor up.
And for sure, there's the ComHab and, oh, it's COVID, we can't find people. But I also have a 23-year-old person on my books, and that the family doesn't even want to get together to redo his budget to grab that adult PRA. And it
That's tough. That's tough.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you try, but
Does this work now?
you still sound like God, but that's okay.
I'm not, so I'm out.
What?
Comment, Sue, on the FIs would know how much budgets are utilized. Back in CSS days, the state did keep a closer eye on utilization, and people were really encouraged to use certain percentages of their budgets. That's less of an issue now. Personally, some of it, I feel like sometimes it almost seems to stress people out when you push them to use the budget more. And if they're using a piece of it that's making it worth it to them, I'm not going to judge that it's not worth it to them. I have a few folks that truly all they use is OTPS. And if that's what they find they need, and that's what's benefiting them, and it's not stressing them out, and they find it helpful, I'm not going to keep pushing things at them. So I do think that there is some, even my own kids, when I look at their budgets, yes, they're built almost a full PRA. We don't touch a fraction of it because I personally try to use just what we need. That's just more my own philosophy. I'm not going to access funds we don't need. So it's very underutilized. Do I know I could use more? Yes. To me, I'd rather not. I'd rather stick to what do we really need for them. And it's different. They're kids. So as mom, I'm going to still pay for certain things because I'm mom. But I have quite a few people who might only use OTPS, or think there's some that only use FRR, and we have those conversations, and that's just a choice. Family reimbursed respite, sorry, you don't mean to throw acronyms out there, letting them kind of make that choice on their own of what works. As long as I'm still having that conversation, I try to not get too personally invested in it, because I don't want them to think I'm pushing them to do something that they don't feel like they need or want right then.
Yeah, I also wanted to say as an FI, I mean, I see this all the time that, you know, they're like, oh, this is so much work. This is so much work. So as an FI, I try to, you know, stress that any meeting there is, or especially very early on, that, you know, this is self-direction. It's a great program. There's so many options. And it's work for you. So I don't want to scare people away, because I do believe it's a great program, but I also really want to stress that it is work for him, you know, work for them. I mean, I'm here as the FI, and the broker is there too, but really ultimately there's going to be work. You know, some people kind of describe it as a part-time job. I think the people that it works well for, I hope it's not quite like a, you know, half-time job even, but it's definitely something that I think is good to stress in the beginning and repeatedly.
Gloria, I know.
Don't-
Go,
oh,
Gloria,
Just
sorry.
one other thing to mention too, in terms of utilizing the budget. What I will often suggest to parents as you're going through the transition process and the individual is, let's start looking at some pieces of adult life that we can start practicing and working on while the student is in high school. So just to use Jimmy as an example, again, we had staff for him every day after school for 3 hours during high school. And they would come home, they would help him make his snack. They would go grocery shopping for snack and school lunch items. They would go for walks or do other fitness activities, clean his room, clean the kids' bathroom, do his laundry, so that a lot of those and he was also in a routine. So Mondays you did this, Tuesdays you did that. And it really, really helped him to start building those routines, so that when he moved and was living independently in the community, those routines had been in place for a really long time for him. So that you don't have to, you know, start working, live independently, and do all that grown-up stuff at once. You can kind of, like, you know, we all do. You can start working on some of that stuff in high school, and, you know, save some the cooking he never has liked. So, you know, that we're still working on 10 years later. But so I think sometimes it doesn't occur to parents, oh, that's weird to have somebody in there helping him make his lunch. But it's one of the things a lot of people need to learn, is accepting help if they need it from people that are not their parents. And so that is definitely a skill that you want to develop during high school, rather than all of a sudden just, you know, having the gate come down and expecting a student to get all their help from somebody other than you, cold turkey, or a lot of their help from somebody else. So anyway.
One of the other things that I kind of talk to parents about is those end of life planning conversations. People who are parents of people with developmental disabilities will have a lot of different costs associated to somebody's end of life. So even if they don't need the money now, they could look into whatever money they do save from having a self-direction plan, putting it into like a burial fund or a third-party trust, so that upon their passing, the person that they work with is also going to be set up very well on their passing as well. Just kind of a lot of that future discussion, which does require a lot of rapport with the family, but it does ease a lot of that stress that comes with that planning process.
That's something that we've done, like for my boys, their personal use transportation reimbursements, I usually put into their ABLE account, because I always felt bad putting in, because I'm mom. But then as I thought about it, I was like, well, this is a nice way to kind of build up some of their ABLE accounts, so they have some funds when they're moving out. So a lot of their mileage will go in there. So sometimes it is having some of those conversations. And sometimes it is starting slow, like Laura said, starting with just the family reimbursed respite and getting used to that, starting with just one class, starting with just one membership. Some families do dive all in wholeheartedly. And Tiffany Tomlin will say this a lot during her person-centered planning. They'll dive in and try to do it all. And then they find, I don't have any time. Like, I can't do this all. This is too much. I can't get to 5 classes 5 nights a week. So sometimes just pacing themselves to kind of try things slowly as it makes sense, versus trying to dive all in and use it all. But again, Kirsten, I know we'll see people who go 3, 4, 5 years and they use like maybe 5,000 out of their PRA, if that. But again, as long as we're having those conversations, as long as we're sure they understand, we're helping them understand the budget, as long as we're sure they know how to use the systems to get reimbursement, as long as we've offered help with suggestions on finding staff, I think that's ultimately, maybe that's what's, that little bit is helping them enough that it's still worth it to them. So Laura, you unmuted. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, but I forgot what it was, so.
Sorry. I know Gloria's been waiting with a question over here for a while, so let's see what Gloria. Go ahead, Gloria. Oh, you're
okay. There I go. I just want to say that I did note that I came in late. I said I wasn't going to come today. I had something I had to take care of, but I did manage to get here by 10:30 this morning, and I'm so grateful that I did, because I got a lot of information out of it. One of my clients, I am a new broker. A lot of this is new to me. But I have one of my clients that I received. He already transitioned because he received his full PRA. So now I got questions I'm going to take back to his FI to make sure that his transitional package was completed, because I don't want something from that to come back on me. And also, I am working with someone that's a child that, the client, he's just turned, I think, 19 or whatever. So I don't know about his transition package, so I can look into that too. But he's looking into becoming self-direct. So, and he was I think it's been completed, because I think I did the life plan, and SVR was there, and they transferred him out of that program. So I believe all the paperwork is done, but I'm going to check on that. But I do know that him being a self-direct individual, he's going to need a lot of assistance, because his whoever was working him when access, he said, well, Gloria, you look like he's going to have the right person, because I was already encouraging him to let him know, you got to be more assistant, you got to be more consistent in doing things for yourself. So, and then I told him, I said, well, you need to start with at home while you're there now, transitioning to going to bed early, because you're going to be responsible. You got to get up and go to work, things like that, because I worked in the health field for over 20 years in different aspects of it, worked in day groups, worked in nursing homes, did private duty. But I do know that this is something that I really, really, really enjoy doing, because I love helping people, love being there for people. And I am so glad that I managed to get onto this here, because I got so much information, and I've been attending the personal center planning classes, because this is all new to me, and I enjoyed learning and want to make sure I give my clients the best service that I have to offer to them. And I told them I even sign up and I have a mentor, so that when I submit my budget, I make sure everything is right. That's why I'm so glad I came, because I want to make sure I get all the notes, because I miss about the first 30 minutes. I think I logged in about 10:30, 10:32, somewhere in there. So if I can just get an email of all that, and I will, I love it. And Mary Terry, I see you quite a lot. And in quite a few of you, I have seen a lot in some of the other classes I've attended. But I'm dedicated to being the best broker that I can. And if I wrote some names down, so if I reach out and email someone, I got a question for you, can you help me with this? I don't mind reaching out. That's it.
Thank you, Gloria. I'm glad you joined. And honestly, that's the hope with these, is that will at least give you information that can get you asking more questions. I do want to be clear, some of the information here really is on the care managers and care coordinators. And we do want to make sure as brokers, we're not billing for things that care coordinators and care managers should be doing. And very likely, if you document on doing something the care coordinator or care manager should have been doing, the FI may reject it. So a lot of this is just more so that in meetings, you can bring up, where are we with X, Y, and Z? What is the plan? You know, when you're in those meetings, you know, like I said, that last year of transition, you're spending a lot of time in meetings. It's fine to bring up some of the stuff like, hey, I heard there's supposed to be this transmittal thing filled out, but you're not in any way responsible for that transmittal or making sure it's submitted. It really is on the care coordinator or care manager. But yes, when we're all meeting and collaborating, it's helpful when we all have as much knowledge as we can coming in there so we can make the transition as smooth as possible. But just be careful when you're supporting with this, that you're sticking within the broker realm. And if you're really not sure if something is the care manager or your responsibility, you know, run it by the FI, run it by the Facebook group. But just be careful that you're not completing things that really are the care coordinator's job. But those meetings are a great time because that's a planning team meeting. You're going to be able to bill for it as a planning team meeting, but that's a great time to ask some of those questions and make sure that, again, that action plan, like Laura said, who's doing what, who's responsible for what, having it in writing is very helpful. And then we can kind of revisit at each meeting to check in, is everybody doing their part to make sure that this transition goes smoothly. So we are close to the end of time, but Laura, go ahead.
I remember what it was now. I thought of another option for transition for during the day that I've neglected to mention. Some students supported by OPWDD do receive Regents diplomas and go on to college. And so supporting those individuals with community have, if they need support that is not provided through the Office for Students with Disabilities of the college, and is kind of, in my experience, it's frequently individuals that have executive functioning issues, you know, organizational stuff. You can't hire a tutor, you can't provide services that can be provided by the college, but you can provide supports to individuals who are attending college. So that was an option that was not included, and I can pop that in there as well, that I had kind of forgotten about. In some instances, you can also use community habilitation workers to support people that need more support that can be provided by a job coach at work as well. But again, they can't be doing job coaching activities. They need to be providing social supports, executive functioning type supports. So, you know, you have to be very careful how that staff action plan is written for those ComHab workers, if you're going to be doing either one of those things. So, but that's an option that, you know, people may or may not be aware of. So that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Laura, because I'm actually working. I have a college student that's done with, just transitioned out of school, is at college, and I'm also doing my first housing, maybe subsidy of the dorm situation.
Yep, right.
So not that there's time to talk about that, but that's another. It's probably more rare, I would think.
Right.
For the population we serve, I guess I don't know that a high percentage of them end up in the college dorm, but some of them do.
Yeah, I had several clients on the autism spectrum that attended college with supports, got bachelor's degrees, you know, or associate's degrees. And so.
Do keep in mind, if the person's going to be going to college out of state, you really need to work with the DDRO. I've heard very mixed answers on whether or not people can keep their waiver. A lot of that may come down to care management, figuring out if the waiver has to be suspended. But the housing subsidy for sure cannot be used out of state because it's based on zip code. But just be aware, if someone's going to college out of state, you're going to want to work closely with care coordination management and the DDRO and the FI on what that will look like. So.
Yeah, so it's getting towards noon, so we should probably wrap it up. I don't know, Carissa, if people can stay, you can kind of address it afterwards, if you can keep it open, if people want to chat. I just wanted to point out that if you also had questions, you know, put the questions in the Facebook page, the broker Facebook page, and, you know, people can respond there. I also wanted to put in a plug for people to submit to Carissa or any of us kind of on that first page there with ideas for other presentations. We really want to do things that are helpful and useful to people. I jotted down a few ideas. I mean, finding staff, not that we have the magic bullet here, but you know, that's something I think that maybe people can share resources that people are interested in, and kind of relationships and dating and consent and all that stuff might be, I don't know if that's a topic on its own, but I read some interest. So really maybe while it's fresh in your mind, kind of maybe something jogged your memory today, just kind of jot down a few notes, jot us an email, because we do go from those suggestions as well. So yeah, I don't know if you don't want to say anything else. Thank you so much, Laura, for presenting, for being available, and the liaisons for being on here as well. It's been really useful to have you here, obviously. So, and welcome the new liaisons. So yeah.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye.